Welcome to session 50 of our weekly event series where we interview experts in tech across specifically non-technical roles, non-coding related roles, to learn about their careers and see what takeaways may apply to us as we navigate our careers as well. In today's session number 50 with Aishwarya Rao, and the session is called How to Be Successful as a Product Manager at Tech Companies like Webex, IBM, and Pulse Secure. And Aishwarya, I saw that you got your master's degree and you kind of went deep into these big tech companies really quickly. So your career has grown really quickly. We're going to dig into that today. And of course, the folks that are on this call, a lot of them are specifically interested in product management, and the folks that are going to be listening to this recording as well. Just a quick agenda here for today for our event. We're going to hear a quick introduction from Aishwarya. So we typically have questions prepared throughout. And then of course, throughout this conversation today, we're going to have a discussion about how one can advance their career, specifically in product, specifically in big tech, big companies and recognizable brands like the ones that you saw on the screen here. But once again, as a reminder, do feel free to use the chat. That can help us guide the conversation, especially as we have a pretty tight group today. We want to make sure that we surface the things that are coming up on your end. We see some folks that are enrolled in our next cohort of our Technology Career Acceleration Program. And so we have 1 or 2 spots still available in that program that starts on Monday. So if you're new to this call, we encourage you to apply into a more formal 8-week certificate-based program if you're interested in learning from experts in tech, I should say, similar to what you see here on the screen, school16.co/apply. And we do prioritize scholarships and the like for people that do come to these events. We appreciate that you are making this a priority for yourself and taking time out of your schedule to come here today. So we're going to stop sharing our screen so we can get started.
Great. Well, welcome, Aishwarya. It's really nice to have you here. And, my first question to you, I'd love to understand how you got into tech in the first place and when you decided that's where you want to be, because everybody's pathway into tech is a little bit different. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So, I'd have to go back for that. But it's interesting that you asked about how I got into tech. I think for the most part, growing up, really thought I would go down the biosciences, medical path, maybe, right? And around, I think it was grade 10, grade 11, I took a class, I took a Python class in high school, and it was kind of one of the first times that it's a coding class, and it was one of the first times that I was just constantly thinking about, this problem that I needed to solve. I was thinking about it when I was about to go to sleep. I would dream about it. And it was the first time that I'd felt that way. And I decided, all right, this is interesting. Let me keep exploring it. I kept my options open for a little bit, but then decided to go down that route when I went into college. And it's funny, when I was in college, I interned as a DevOps engineer for a startup. And so when I went in there full time, I decided, wait, I want to try something different. And so I decided I wanted to explore product support engineering. And I think that was kind of the first pivot into tech, but not necessarily coding, right? And I didn't really know it at the time. It was just something that I wanted to explore. And in hindsight, it was great. I got to work directly with the users, right, that were having issues with the product. I was still technical enough to be understanding how our product worked, what was expected behavior versus not. I was working with our engineers and our QAs and our testers. And it was really fulfilling. I got to, again, it was very much like, this is a problem, what's happening, and then kind of finding a solution to it. And it was very satisfying. But I eventually started to want to be a part of that product development process, the decision-making process. And I was also thinking about, okay, I want to pursue higher education. I want to go into grad school. And so they kind of aligned at the same time. And I, moved to LA from India. I went to USC, got my master's in computer science. And that's when the pivot went from a choice to still a choice, but more like, wow, I don't feel about coding how anyone else in my peer group feels about coding, right? It really energized them, and it really made them like want to keep doing it. And that was not the case for me, halfway through the program. And so my approach then went from, during career fairs, trying to go and pitch in myself for software engineering roles, open software engineering roles. It switched from that to, okay, I get the chance to talk to a recruiter. Let me ask them, what are some tech, like coding adjacent roles that are open that I could then explore? Because I'd only had exposure to product support at that point, right? And so that's when, these recruiters were like, oh, I mean, there's so many things you could explore. There's product management, there's solutions engineering, there's, tech sales engineering, all these kinds of other avenues. And so that's when I started to actively try and interview for those roles. And, eventually a few things clicked, and we can absolutely talk about what happened there. But I decided that I wanted to go down the product management route, despite having these other options and, thoughts that I wanted to explore, because I think product is a cool space where, because you're the communication hub between a few different roles in the organization, you get this chance to directly work with these roles that you want to explore. So if I want to explore tech sales, if I want to explore solutions engineering, I get to connect with them on not a day-to-day basis, but in on some level, and I can obviously learn more about that role from them if product does not suit me, right? And so far it's been fine. I like product, but I know that that's still an option if I do want to pivot. And so I think it gives you this opportunity to be at this space where a lot of different things are happening, and you are aware of what's going on in the organization. You understand how it's being built. So that's kind of like the high level of how I broke into product. And my first role was at IBM. Yeah. Got
it. Very cool. Well, I think there's so many great things in great nuggets from what you just said. First of all, I think part of what's exciting to me about tech is that you do have the flexibility to pivot in and out of different roles, change careers several times throughout your career, which is even throughout a short period of time, which is really cool. But, one thing that you said, I think it took a lot of self-awareness. A lot of us, especially if you have pressure from your parents or your significant other or your friends, they kind of see you in a particular, I see you smiling because I know how I have a lot of Indian friends. I know how Indian parents are, and they're same as Eastern European parents are, which is, they want you to be successful. They want you to have financial stability. They want you to choose a path. Hey, you studied computer science. You should be an engineer. What are you doing? Those conversations play out for a lot of people, a lot of families. And it takes, I think, a lot of self-awareness to say, hey, there are people around me that are better at this, and I can see how energized they are, and I want to be equally as energized about the role. And I'm glad that you found product management that could give you some of that energy. But I do know, just by hearing you talk, people might not know, of course, that we talked about this in the beginning of the call. You grew up in a different country, you went to college in a different country, and you came to Los Angeles, you came to the US with basically zero network, which is a difficult place to start, in particular if you're going to be going for a very competitive, well-paying role like product management. So let's talk about that. I'm glad that you were able to find it as your avenue. How were you able to get that first opportunity at a brand like IBM in the first place?
Yeah, that's a really valid point that you bring up, because I think, there are multiple, I think you've called this chicken and egg situations, right? In terms of work, like entry-level jobs, expecting experience, which is one chicken and egg situation. Product roles, expecting product experience, which is another chicken and egg situation. And I think it's kind of similar here too, where a lot of people will say things like, oh, you want a new job? Well, you should network, or leverage your network. But what do you do if you don't have one? Well, to have one, you need a job. And it's like, right, but I don't have one of those. So I will say, the short answer is you should lean on your network in order to be able to find something that fits you. Maybe there's someone in your network that can recommend you to a role that, they're being reached out to for, and they're like, not for me, maybe, but you seem like a good fit. I'll send them your way, right? Those things can only happen if you build out a network of folks who are in the role that you want to eventually be in. So that's one aspect of it, but I didn't go about it that way when I started, for various reasons that I'm not particularly sure of. I think one of the things that a lot of folks do when we're coming in with no network and we're kind of having to start our career, especially after a master's program, I think when people our age do have a network in the country, if they've been here for college and things like that, is okay, well, what can I do that's within my control? So what people will naturally do, and what I did, is start cold applying to jobs on LinkedIn, right? And I was having no luck with it. And a lot of people won't for a very long time. And so I was talking to other folks about it, and they were like, oh, well, how many jobs do you apply to in a day? And I was like, I don't know, like 2 maybe. And like, if that, because I wanted to be right. And they were like, no. You got to be applying to 10 jobs, cold applying to 10 jobs per day in order to get a few interviews by the time internship season starts, so that you can then have an internship, hopefully convert that, and then do the same thing when full-time season starts, right? And I tried it, but I will say, like, I think there are some people that can do that, and I simply couldn't. Like, it was not something that was sustainable for me. So I won't speak about whether or not that is something that is, that will not bring results or bring results, because I didn't do that well, frankly, right? And so I decided, well, what can I do that is within my control that would help me a little bit more? And once I thought, okay, maybe product is right for me to explore, I figured I barely know anything about it. I don't know anyone that works in product. I know tons of people that work in software, not tons, but people that have worked in software at least, right? Back in India, but I don't know anyone in product. And so for me, it was purely out of curiosity of knowing what a day-to-day looks like. I mean, I had done like random LinkedIn courses, tried to learn the basics of product management, but it's nothing like what the real experience is like. So I reached out to so many folks on LinkedIn, actually, and then eventually decided to narrow my search down to women in product, and because I think there were a lot of things that I could see that we could align on in terms of concerns or what it's like working in corporate America in general. And it's funny because I know that I reached out to so many people. I don't know how many, but I can only remember the people that did reply to me, right? And so I see that as being really valuable. It's something that, and the reach out was not like, hey, let me tell you about myself and why I want this job and why I'm great for it. It's more of, I see that you're working in this role. I see that you've had XYZ experience. I saw that you pivoted into product, because most people pivot into product. So if you don't start off in product, if you're not, your path is the right path, right? And so just kind of calling that out and being like, I would really like to learn what you do in your day to day. Could you spare 20 to 30 minutes? And I would really appreciate that. And you could even buy them a coffee, online. I've had people do that to me now, where they reach out to me and virtually buy me a coffee, right? Like send me a Starbucks. I absolutely am not saying do that for me, but I'm saying, like, it's always nice when you're trying to like bring a human aspect to it. And I think people naturally gravitate towards, yeah, of course, I'd love to grab coffee and like talk about my job. I think it's more about people's bandwidth and their time. And so I did that. And one person, actually 2 out of the 3 people that I reached out to from IBM responded to me. And one of them was really lovely. Both of them were really lovely, but one of them, I'd already applied to that job, but she also put in a good word for me with the recruiter. And I connected with the recruiter as well. And it kind of snowballed from there, right? And I think once you have like a shoe in, like a foot in the door, right? Once you join the company, that entire company becomes your network. If like the potential to be your network, right? And so then you have all these opportunities to connect with the people that you want. And they're going to be warmer and warmer as time goes on. So sorry if that was very long, but.
Oh, that was fantastic. And, I love that you took people's advice, but ultimately ignored it and went with your own approach, which is try to build relationships.
Yeah, I mean, and I did do a lot of the other, I mean, I think you do need to like dot your I's, cross your T's, right? Do your due diligence. But if there's somewhere else where at the end of the day that you are more than your resume, people are just naturally more charismatic when they're connecting with somebody, right? Versus just like a piece of paper, any day of the week. And so you might as well leverage the fact that you have this ability to connect with someone and make your case in that way instead of just like this piece of paper, which absolutely they're going to look at anyway. So
yeah. And I also like that you adjusted your outreach approach and ended up focusing on women in product, because like I think anything you can use to your advantage to put yourself to help somebody identify with you as an individual and want to help you, you should be using it to your advantage, right? And I think you did that, and that's why you saw results, and you ended up connecting with people who, once they had a conversation with you, actually wanted to help you.
That's another aspect too, is if you feel like you're at a certain disadvantage because of XYZ reasons, chances are there's someone with the same set of disadvantages that has quote unquote made it to a position that you want to be in. And if you reach out to them, their natural inclination is gonna want to be to help because they know what that was like. And so I think make use of that to find the right people who will empathize with your situation and want to help you out.
I have a quick kind of tangential question, but
Yeah.
Maybe in the beginning when you were doing this outreach, if you weren't getting responses, how did you not get discouraged and how did you continue to do the outreach?
I don't have a great answer for this. I think I do tend to be the type of person where if something's going wrong, I try as best as I can to fix it. Sometimes this is not a great approach, especially, if you feel like maybe there's tension between you and a colleague. Like over poking that bear just to fix something that maybe just needs time, for example, that's not helpful. Like you need to know when you need to rein yourself in, right? But when it comes to these kinds of things, maybe there are aspects that you can control. So when I initially started doing this, and I even have the LinkedIn messages, I could probably scroll back to them. But when I would reach out to people, maybe they were a year or two older than me and had graduated from the same undergrad as me, the same college, and now they were a product manager. I was like, great. And they were a woman. I was like, amazing. I am going to reach out to her because she's, I guess, in my network, even though I've never really talked to her, and I'm going to try and see if I can connect with her. And I think she was one of the first people that I reached out to in this way. And my message was so long. It was embarrassingly long. And it was essentially me pitching myself to her and my experiences and what classes I'm taking. And, of course, my resume and like, this is the job link. Like, do you think that I would be a good fit? So on and so forth. And that's a lot to ask of someone who has a full-time job. Like I think like people, and I've had this happen to me multiple times. When you're in the job search, you're just like, oh, this person's where I'm at. Things must be great. And then you get to where you want to be. And of course, you have all of the day-to-day responsibilities and burdens that come with that. So you're always going to be really busy. And I didn't understand that at that time. And so in my head, I was like, oh, she wouldn't even respond to me, even though we're like first-degree connections on LinkedIn. And I was a little hurt by it. And then eventually, as time went on, and clearly no one was responding to these things, I would tweak it so that it was less and less and less information about me, and more and more and more information about what I learned about them and what I found interesting. And that took some time, like that gradient, right? Took some time. And I don't think I even realized that I was tuning it in that way. But eventually my messages were short. They were about them. They were about, let's chat. What time this week works for you? 20 minutes is good for me. I can call you by your phone. We can do video, whatever works. Like if time zone issues make it so that I have to get up at 5 a.m., I'm not going to be talking about that, right? I'm going to be like, yes, let's do that. And just trying to reduce as much as possible the number of barriers to them, connecting with me. I also had someone from USC reach out to me through the alumni network to get some user research feedback. This was last year. And I had a lot of stuff going on. It was a pandemic. Everyone had a lot of stuff going on. And I was really stressed out, but they sent an email with a Calendly link and they were like, this is the user research that I'm doing. I think that your experience would be perfect for me to talk to. Here's the link. Let me know what your availability is. Just choose whatever your availability is and we can meet at that time. Boom. So easy. I didn't have to go back and forth. And so I think as soon as people get overwhelmed, they have all these things that they need to do for their job that they can't ignore, that they're probably going to ignore messages that they get on LinkedIn. But if you can make it so easy for them and just make them be like, I just want you to talk about yourself, they're going to be like, yes, fine. I want to help, so I think that's what I would take away from that. Tweak your I guess like message so that it's to the point and short and it's about them.
Yeah, you sound almost like you've taken a School16 class, because that's something that you figured out on your own that oftentimes people have to learn the hard way, and something that we teach. Absolutely. Were you gonna add something?
I was going to say, it almost also sounds like you're a natural born PM, because you took an iterative approach to outreach strategy and you adjusted it throughout. But I'm really glad you shared that story, because look, we do a lot of cold outreach, right? We've always done it. We've been in sales, we got comfortable with it. But for us personally, the best opportunities have come through that cold outreach, because you can't just sit around and wait for an opportunity to come to you. But humans do like building relationships with other humans if you give them a good enough reason to do that. So it's really great that you persevered. And hopefully for folks on this call that might be taking this approach as well, if you send 20, 30, 40, even 50 messages and you don't get results, it's not you. It just means that you have to change the approach. Change your profile on LinkedIn, change what you're saying in these messages, make it more about them than yourself, change the target of who you're reaching out to, and you will start seeing those results. I don't know why colleges and universities are still giving, I literally had one of my old TAs at NYU tell me that for data science roles, her career services advisor told her to apply to 100 jobs a week. And I'm like,
this is what I'm saying. I understand the numbers game, but it's really going to drain you. And ultimately you want to get a job at a company that you can see yourself working at. It can't just be, you can't find 100 jobs that you want to do every week on the internet. It's not, that doesn't make sense. At that point, that you're just trying to just see what sticks, right? And you shouldn't, that's a disservice to yourself. So yeah.
And employers notice that when you're spraying and praying. When I put up a job ad and people are just applying that are completely irrelevant without any customization, I notice it and I ignore those applications. Even if they could be a good candidate, I ignore it because it's a waste of time. But so we're preaching to the choir here. You're absolutely right. I do want to talk about that first role, because one of the things you mentioned is you can only learn so much from online videos or certificates or however you might want to learn about product. And you had done all that research. So tell us a little bit about how the reality of a product role at IBM was different than maybe what you expected, and how you learned on the job, what it ended up actually being on the job.
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so first, how did I go about learning product, and how was it different to learn it versus actually live it at IBM, for example, right? Definitely did all the research that I could. I think another aspect of this, right, is getting through a product interview is again very different from being a product manager. And they're two very different skills. There's the interviewing skills for interviews, right? And then there's learning all of the frameworks and knowing when to apply the frameworks and being very structured in your answering process. And that gets you in with the, with the interview process. And then there's a whole other deal of the actual day-to-day. And I think with the day-to-day things, I mean, yes, there's absolutely tools that you can employ to, like, for example, decision-making frameworks. Like if you're trying to prioritize a bunch of features, yes, you can use that. But I think as time goes on, it becomes less and less and less about the frameworks and more and more about how do you work with people to get you all to be pointing your efforts to the same direction and have that be the direction that the organization wants to go as well, and that you have validated is good and correct, of sound logic, right? And I think that day to day is really, really challenging because, for example, at IBM, we had a 2-month boot camp when we started off to give us practical experience into what product management is like. And, we were broken off into little groups of product managers and designers, and we would work on different projects across the company for 2 months. I look back at that and I think now, even that wasn't an accurate representation, right? Because we didn't necessarily execute on a product proposal that we put together. And every step of the way, like, challenges will come about where there's like a best practice way of doing it. And when you actually join your team, there's the way your team is doing it because of the way humans have different personalities, and they'll all put in their own way of how things need to be done, depending on who has the strong personality in the team, right? And then it's up to you to kind of work with that, work with what you know, to kind of like keep moving forward. And so what happened with me is, I think, I came in, I didn't necessarily feel like I was prepared for the product role. And I think that that's normal. I think when you start, how are you going to be prepared, right? It ended up with me making mistakes and not feeling good about any of it, and feeling like I wasn't cut out for product. So I think one of the big things that I would say is, even during the interview process, like, whatever it is, trying to understand how it is that you would feel like you're set up for success. Because of course, like, your managers can set you up in whatever way that they think is right, but you're going to have to understand that this is going to be tweaked. This needs to be tweaked. Your path needs to be tweaked as you move forward. And definitely there needs to be room for making mistakes, because only through that will you realize, oh, this current process is not working for me. It's not working for the team. It's not working for me. Or, oh, I realize that I need to say no more, right? And it's one of those things where you'll learn all these like bullet points of what it means to be a product manager, and you're not going to be able to pull it out of the manual when the time comes, until you have an experience like that and you fail and it gets burned into your memory. And so next time you're just like, no, I know what happened last time. Right. And so I think that's where the value of experience comes in. And I think that's where it's really cool to transition into product, because you can get this kind of experience in a lot of different places, as long as you're wearing different hats, right? And you're kind of in a place where you are the communication hub, or you are driving a lot of innovative projects. They need not necessarily be like online projects. They could be a physical project. They could be a program, whatever it is. I think, and all of the failures and lessons that come with it, ultimately, because you're working with people, you're going to end up learning how to work with them better. And I think that's the biggest thing, is with product, you constantly have to learn how to work with your team. And when you join a new team, it's a new dynamic, right? And so giving yourself that kind of like ramp up is like really important. So I would say I'm constantly learning, because I don't feel like I ever have like a perfect grip on it. And I'm always asking other product managers, like, how do you do this? Or how do you do that? Because I don't think everyone has all the answers, because they don't have all the experience. So just knowing right off the bat that even if you're not in product or you haven't started off in product, you have a unique set of experiences that you've learned from and that you can leverage in that job, is important.
Mm.
Did I stay on
So-
topic?
Well, he
Yes.
absolutely did, and thank you for the depth of your explanations. You know, I was so we're in the middle of designing a product management concentration, and I was talking today to our lead instructor, who's also a product manager at a company called Pluralsight, and we're working on the curriculum, and she's getting feedback from another product manager at another company, and you know, it's funny because we're talking about how different it is from company to company, and like we mentioned user stories, and she's like, yeah, don't tell anyone, but I don't know the last time I did a user story.
Exactly. It's so different. And you're gonna you learn the right way of doing things, and then you learn every other company that you work for's way of doing things. And so it's one of those things where you have to like tweak it as much as possible while staying within the confines, of your org, so that at least you're all aligned, because you have to be aligned.
Exactly. As a matter of, well, that's probably your primary job as a PM, is to make sure everybody's aligned.
Right.
But all that said, knowing the frameworks is important to get your foot in the door. Knowing how to answer those questions when it comes to these interviews is
Absolutely.
really important. So my question for you is, how did you get good at that in making sure that you can communicate to these hiring managers, or whoever it was you were in the room with, that you are going to be good at this job, even though you were still figuring it out?
I'll say a few things about this. First, there are opportunities for folks that don't have experience with product to get into product, right? And those are rotational product management programs. What IBM's bootcamp, product bootcamp, was also like that, where it's not just new grad hires. So if you're not a new grad and you feel like, oh, my chance to get into these programs is out, that's not true, right? I think that, there's a lot of opportunity if you have previous experience in general to be able to transition. A lot of programs are open to, having interviews with you that are not focused on, okay, what was your previous product management experience, what product did you launch, because they're coming from this expectation that yes, you are transitioning into it and you have a specific set of skills that you're still going to be able to leverage. Having said that, I think going back to the basics for me, with interviewing, it's always been about making sure that like I outline all of the questions, right, that could possibly come out of an interview, at least in the first couple of rounds, right? Because you can find that online. You can find that after like one or two experiences where you're just like, oh, you were going to ask me that. Okay. Let me write that down. And so once you have that list, just having clear answers, almost bulleted answers, if you want, for each of those things, and getting really comfortable with reciting it in the mirror to your friend, whatever it is. Right. I think like having that kind of comfort with your own experience and really looking at it from like no, it's not just that I did XYZ. It's that these were all of the outcomes of what I did. And kind of being able to talk about yourself in that way is not something that comes easy, but you have to do that. And so you have to practice, and to practice, you need to write it down. That's one thing. And I think another big thing that I noticed with product interviews in general, is that you might not have a perfect answer, and that's okay, right? But the way to work with that is to still provide structure to it. So like a lot of case study product questions, right, where they're just like, how would you improve Twitter? And it's like, what? Like they get paid so much money to improve it. Like there's nothing that I'm going to say that's like going to be mind blowing, right? That's okay. And like for you to be able to think about it on the fly. No one's expecting a perfect answer. And I didn't understand this initially, so I would get super nervous. But if you can take 2 minutes during the interview to say, hey, give me a couple of minutes, and then write down like, okay, what's the question? What is our objective? Who is our customer? What are their main motivations? And, out of that, what would they find delightful, or whatever it is, and coming up with a few features, and then kind of trying to like build that structure from there. And then being able to say this, like you started this call with an agenda, right? Being able to give an agenda to your answer, to be like, these are the things I'm going to talk about. And then conclude it with, in conclusion, these are the things that I talked about. This is why I want to do this, right? It doesn't, ultimately, it's like that hamburger paragraph thing. It's like, it doesn't really matter that you don't have the perfect answer, because you're demonstrating that you have the thinking ability to break the problem down into smaller problems. They just want to see how you go from A to B to C, ultimately to the solution, right? And you can get creative with time, and they know that. That's one big thing. I also want to say that you can practice with friends, right, for case management things, and I did that, but I got really, really shy at one point and self-conscious. I didn't want my friends to see me struggling with like a case study question, or I didn't want to talk to them about my previous experiences and all of that. So if you struggle with that, I think there's something online called product management interview, or I can absolutely send the link to you folks, and you could maybe distribute it later. But it's a way for you to get matched with someone random at a particular time of your choosing. And you both have like 20 minutes each. You get flashed one question, another question. One of you goes first, the other one goes second. And you get to practice case study questions with each other. And they're complete strangers that you can keep your video off if you want. But I kept my video on and I practiced with a few people. And it was really great because you get time to get feedback from them, because they're actively interviewing too. And I actually ended up meeting one of my mentors on this. And it's been great. And we catch up every few months. So I think that really just like, that's another thing, right? Everyone's interviewing for product roles. You're going to connect with more people in product. Everyone that I talk to on there, they're on my LinkedIn. So that's a really good way to practice and get used to the structure that's expected of you for product management interviews. And of course, there are books that, will come up top of the Amazon list as soon as you type in product management. So no need to go into that. One last thing that I wanted to mention is also that no matter how prepared you are, if you're still feeling a lot of anxiety while you're at the interview, one thing to consider is that maybe it's not you, maybe it's the interview process, right? Because one of the reasons why I joined Cisco Webex is because I can naturally get very nervous when I'm interviewing and they're on the fly questions where they're asking you to come up with innovative solutions for like a certain problem. And I can immediately freeze up, but I was given a very psychologically safe space to think through a problem and come up with creative solutions. And it takes a good interviewer to be able to do that. And it also demonstrates, the empathy that the team has as well. And if you're in a situation where that interviewer is able to talk to you like you're almost part of the same team already, right? That's when you get that level of comfort. So if you're not feeling that when you're interviewing and you feel like you're being put on the spot and they're throwing questions at you rather than trying to give you this feeling where, let's work together on this thing. What do you think? Maybe that's a sign too, and don't ignore that and don't try to like beat it down in order to get through an interview.
Yeah, I really appreciate your transparency here, because I think a lot of people, obviously you're an expert and you're very smart and you've been able to get a lot of experience, but even you still get nervous in these situations. I remember when I was interviewing for product roles, like I remember this one specific example, I was interviewing at Seamless, which is the ordering app, food ordering app. And they asked me this totally random case question about like, on Amazon, someone's about to make a purchasing decision. How would you like change this feature? And I always hated those questions. And I always felt like, maybe I shouldn't be a PM because I don't do well in these questions. Mm-hmm. But even hearing that from you, if I ever was to go for a PM job, which I don't think I will, but if I ever was, I feel like it's more attainable now. And folks on this call should also feel that is more attainable. And it in the end of the day, It might not be about you. Great point. It might be about the interview process, but also it does take a lot of practice, especially for parts of the interview that are inherently uncomfortable for you. And I had the same exact experience as you. I was very uncomfortable in those situations.
Right. And I also want to say, like, if it's hard for you to answer hypothetical questions, like what would you do if blah, 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 or, you know, I think it's also great to lean on your own experience and like say what you would do, and then always leaning on, for example, when I XYZ, I did this, it really increases like perceived credibility, right? Because a lot of the times people are just like, oh yeah, sure, you would do that. I mean, oh, I would communicate and I would, you know, make a decision, make whatever, right? But if you can say that you actually did it with a particular situation, you give like a quick summary of what the situation was, you know, what were the challenges, what did you do, like the actions, and what was the final outcome of that, like the star, right? Situation, action, or star, whatever, situation, action, result, right? And put it into that. Again, I think that there are a lot of things that you don't have to have, like, I built a product that 10,000 people used when I was 15. You don't have to have that kind of experience to, you know, impress an interviewer.
Oops,
Yeah.
We're taking turns hitting mute.
It helps
We'll
to
blame Pumpkin.
helps to build something with 10, 15,000 users at 15 years old, but
It
if you
does.
have, you know, but you're absolutely right. You're essentially just being tested for how you think, how you break down problems, and that's the job of a PM. And in fact, you know, Vadim's not a PM, but actually he is. He's a PM now as a founder, which is actually even harder.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Okay, folks, I want to remind you here in the last 12 minutes, please drop your questions so we can ask them. But my last question to you before we go to the audience, and I hope we see a few questions come in. You know, you've been part of a couple different organizations now. You mentioned how it depends on the organization what the product role is like. It depends on the team what the product role is like. I'd love to hear from you, knowing that we all have our own biases, but I'd love to hear from you an example of what a great product team looks like. You know, what does a great process look like for a team? You know, even if you could walk us through, like, I don't know, a feature. Again, you don't have to give up trade secrets here.
We're gonna make you do a case study question.
But like,
right now.
but when you had particular real world problem that you're working through with the team, and you were really impressed by how the team, yourself included, were able to actually come to a solution, we'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah. Okay. So I can think about a time when this is not necessarily, you know, an example of a great situation per se, but I do think it speaks to some of the characteristics that a team has to have overall, and not just a product manager, in order to get a project done, right? One of the things that I, you know, and I actually am still having this kind of situation buzz, but when I was working at IBM and was working on revamping our user onboarding experience, we actually had a lot of pushback in terms of, you know, oh, we don't have like engineering bandwidth, and we don't have like the time to do this. We would much rather do XYZ things, when, you know, of course, you want to perfect the funnel so that the funnel for the users to come in and actually enjoy using the product in the first X minutes of the product. And that, you know, there was a clear need for it, but a lot of pushback. And I think a big aspect of the pushback was because we were depending on a team outside of us, still within IBM, but we were depending on an infrastructure team in order to be able to actually get this going. And so now this is one of the classic product challenges, and we face this at Webex too, where, like, you know, it's one of those things where teams need to work with each other in order to release any features, any new products, any new experiences. There are different parts of this of Webex that, like, people need to coordinate with. And so the way that, you know, we kind of went about it is, and I think this is what I really liked. What I really liked was, it was one of the first times that I got to experience what true product management process would be like. I got to sit down and kind of go through, the actual user experience and the time taken and so on and so forth for our product versus a competing product. I was able to compare and contrast all of the different experiences on a quantifiable level and also like, qualitative level. And we went into highlighting all of the areas that we could improve on, and that we should improve on in order to go from A to Z in terms of user experience, right? And then collating that with all of the user feedback that we had already gotten, right? In terms of like NPS and things like that. And I think it was a really interesting experience because at that point, it became very clear while presenting all of this information to leadership. And again, we got the opportunity to do that. It became very clear that this was like an obvious need. And I think that's one of the biggest things with product, right? I think you can have great ideas. You can have, like really interesting challenges that you want to solve. You need to really pitch why it will be important for us. And so that could be in terms of monetary, like, revenue that comes in terms of saving time for our users, whatever it is. And so we went through that process of like highlighting what the before and after would look like from an experiential level, but also with revenue and so on and so forth to make that really, really strong case. And then with that, we were able to get buy-in to be like, okay, yes, you should absolutely be working on it. We should have this penciled in, and prioritized. And then from there on, of course, like we had challenges where we had to like depend on other teams. But again, because of this very strong proposal, we got buy-in from them too. And so I was really proud of the engineering team and the design team for working with each other, right? These two completely separate teams kind of working with each other when both of us have very different roadmaps and very different project timelines that we already need to complete anyway. And I see it happen at Webex all the time as well, where somehow people make it work, where, there's a lot of empathy extended to the other team, even though you're not necessarily in their day-to-day, because you understand the need for it and it's been presented well. And I think like that's where I think great product teams like are, if they're able to like really get a project to completion, even while working with team members that don't necessarily align with like their own product priorities. I think that really speaks to like the level of like, I guess like the level of trust that the team has within itself to be able to like go through that process. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for that example. That's fantastic. My takeaway is if you're evaluating opportunities and, in product roles in different companies, you want to make sure you're joining an environment that's collaborative, because that's really going to be your job is
absolutely
said, right?
That's a great way to say it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great way to summarize that. Yeah.
Excellent.
We have a question that came in from Dina, and I'd like to make this, since we only have 6 minutes left, the two-part question. So Dina's question is, you mentioned that you had Python experience in the beginning of the call. What would be your advice for a fresh grad regarding relevant coding languages to know in a business role? And then the follow-up question that I have to that is, do you have examples of folks that came, because we talked about that you can get into product from other functions, that came from non-traditional backgrounds where that wasn't even a thing. Like they didn't know Python, they just knew Python or C++ and still got that role.
Yeah. Okay. So to answer Dana's first question, that's a really great question. First of all, I think someone who's coming out, coming through with a business role or with a business background does not need to know coding, does not need to know, like a particular language, for example. I think what's more important is technical fluency. I'm trying to think of a better term, but essentially it's the ability to be able to understand on a macro level, I guess, like tech trends, right? And what's happening in the tech world and why are those things important on a more medium level. Perhaps understanding, kind of like how do I put it? Understanding how things work, like how the internet works, right? I think there's one really great online book that a few product managers recently put out, actually a few years ago, called Swipe to Unlock. And it has all these interesting technologies, right? That people don't necessarily know the underlying workings of. And that book is specifically written for folks who don't have a tech background. And I think that it's really valuable to read that, because you get a sense of what people are saying in terms of like what an IP address is, or what a server is, or these kinds of things. And that's what I'm saying when I say technical fluency. You want to be able to converse with someone else about tech trends, and also like the basic workings of certain technologies that are hot right now, or that are just required in general. And I think those are the big things. If you're looking for technical product roles, I think then, definitely you should look at Cracking the PM Interview. That's one of the books that has a whole technical section to it, and explore some of the topics in there that it talks about. But ultimately, the idea is not that you know coding, it's more that you have analytical and critical thinking skills. And it's more that you're able to demonstrate that. You don't have to know the exact words. You don't have to know a particular name for an algorithm, but you can describe what that algorithm would do without even knowing that's what it does. And that's what they're looking for. And that's one of the main things that I would say. Second, yes, I think I've worked with so many folks that have not had a background in tech at all, and that have transitioned over. So many folks actually with English majors, folks with psych majors, neuroscience majors. It's actually, I think Cisco is interesting because it's very engineering focused, right? And I'm an engineering product manager there. And lots of, our director of product was a CTO, co-founder, very engineering based background, right? And so a lot of engineers transfer over into product roles, and that happens a lot. But I've worked at IBM, for example, they specifically hire folks, not specifically, but are very open to hiring folks, and lots of other organizations are, that have a non-tech background. I think it's about applying the knowledge that you have, the specific knowledge that you have to whatever product that it is that you're building. I think a lot of psych majors, history majors, art majors, theater majors can really channel empathy, for example. And that could be one of their really strong skills. And that's huge for a product manager. And another aspect to why people like engineers switching into product is because engineers can inherently empathize with other engineers. And, so you don't necessarily need to be an engineer. You just need to know that, hey, we can't make them context switch with like 30 meetings a day. Or we can't like fill their backlog with 1,000 items without really, clearly writing out acceptance criteria for each one so that they know exactly what it is that you're asking them to build. You need to break down ambiguity, for example. You need to understand what they're talking about. Again, have technical fluency. When they're saying, oh, this is not going to work because it's going to make way too many calls to the server and it'll crash. You need to understand what that means. That doesn't mean that you need to have a coding background. And I think there's an aspect of you not knowing this coming through in a product role and then learning, right? And there are lots of folks, director level folks, who eventually become founders on their own, who have completely zero tech school background. And once they come in, once you have your first job in tech, you have a tech background, right? So it's not, and that could be anything. That could be a data analyst, that could be technical writer, UX writer, whatever it is. So
Yeah, you're absolutely right in that. And those are great points. One of the things I talk about to founders, because we advise a lot of founders that hire engineers, but have no idea what they're actually doing, is if you're going to be interviewing engineers, at least learn the base level information. Like what's the difference between a front end engineer and a back end engineer and the different challenges they have, right? That technical fluency that you talked about. You don't have to know in and out exactly what happens when that call goes out to the server, but what is a server? What does that mean? How is that data stored? Why do you need to store the data? What's the difference between the person that's building that infrastructure versus someone that's working on the front end and thinking about user experience, and
Right.
what are the different skills that are required for those roles? And that helps you build that empathy. So that's totally right.
Absolutely.
And the other piece that you said, which is learning on the job, if you're, for the folks that are on this call that are already in tech, maybe you're in your first tech job, you're in customer success, whatever it is, try to get time with maybe the product team, or even better, the engineers. Try to understand, make friends with them, quite honestly, and try to understand what their pain points are. Because oftentimes, if you make an effort to understand them, and then you kind of become the glue within the organization, which is especially important if you're in a tiny company, but also could be in smaller teams with the big companies, then you're going to be slowly seen as that go-to person that they trust, but also that can elevate into a product role because you're creating less friction in the team. And that's much more important than knowing Python, for example, and how to debug something.
Absolutely. And I think, what you said about get to know what they're doing more. Asking, I think like a lot of people shy away from asking questions because they're just like, oh no, I should know this. But no, I think like the more you ask questions, the better you become at your job, especially in product. I think the more you take things for face value, the less value you're able to provide in turn. And so people expect product managers to ask a lot of questions. And I like, this is a challenge for me too, every single day, because I shy away or I just take things at face value. And it's an active effort to, if you have questions and you're not typically shy about asking them, you'll do really well, I think.
Absolutely right. That curiosity is really what people are looking for. I think in every tech role, but product in particular. And if you're struggling getting interviews, if you're struggling doing well in those interviews, I think going back and making sure that you come off as that person that's intellectually curious and going back and doing that deep research. So even if you don't understand something, you at least attempted to, and you're asking smart questions.
Yep.
Is really, really important. I can see that.
Absolutely.
I can see that from you, Aishwarya. So thank you so much for this conversation, folks. Thanks for staying with us here a few minutes late. I just dropped a link in the chat here to our program application. If you're interested in applying, the program is starting next week and we have a few more slots left. I'm also going to drop a link here to our survey. I don't want to be one of those annoying people in companies that ask people to fill out surveys. This one, I promise, takes 30 seconds. We want to know what you liked about this event. We want to know how we improve these. Vadim and I read every single one, and we have these events almost every single week. So we'd love to hear from you, and we're happy to send you the recording of this event as well. Aishwarya, thank you so much for taking the hour to talk to us and being so candid about your experience and sharing that. I think it was super, super valuable. One of the more fun conversations I've had about product in a while. So I appreciate that.
Great. That makes me happy. I'm glad I could be a part of that. And this is really wonderful. I actually learned a bunch too, just by rambling and listening to you folks. So
awesome. Appreciate that. Well, thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day. Everybody else too. Get home safe if you're not home. Have a great day, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.